Before the lights, the fame, and the silver screen immortality, they were just like us. They walked factory floors, served coffee, folded laundry, and chased dreams no one believed in. But fate had other plans. These ordinary men and women would soon become the legends of old Hollywood, the faces on movie posters, the voices echoing through theaters, and the icons who shaped an era. This is the untold journey of 20 classic stars before they were stars. Marilyn Monroe, from factory floors to fame. Before the red lips, the platinum curls, and the camera flashes, Marilyn Monroe was just Norma Jean, a 19-year-old working in a munitions factory in Van Nuys, California. Her days were spent inspecting parachutes and aircraft parts, helping support the war effort during World War II. It was gritty mechanical work, far from the spotlight, far from a Hollywood dream. But fate has a funny way of finding people. While working in that very factory, a military photographer on assignment took notice of her natural charm and undeniable presence. One photo led to another, and suddenly, the shy brunette with a bright smile was modeling for magazines. That exposure opened doors to screen tests, small film roles, and eventually a contract with 20th Century Fox. Her climb wasn't instant. Marilyn was overlooked, underestimated, and typecast early in her career. But she studied, trained, and pushed forward, crafting a public persona that would become one of the most enduring in Hollywood history. Behind the glamour, there was always a worker, a woman who had started with nothing but a job, a dream, and relentless determination. From the drone of factory machines to the dazzle of the big screen, Marilyn's story reminds us that legends can come from the most ordinary beginnings. Audrey Hepburn, ballet shoes and bomb shelters. Before the elegance, the pearls, and the timeless black dress, Audrey Hepburn was a child of war, dancing in the shadows of occupied Europe. Born in Belgium and raised in the Netherlands, she spent her teenage years surviving the harsh realities of World War II. Food was scarce, fear was constant, and dreams of stardom seemed impossibly distant. But even amid chaos, Audrey held on to something beautiful: ballet. She trained in secret, slipping into worn slippers and practicing in basements during air raids. Her passion for dance was her escape, her rebellion, and her hope. After the war, she pursued it seriously, moving to London and taking small jobs to pay for lessons. She worked as a shop assistant, posed as a model, and even took bit parts as a chorus girl in theater productions. It wasn't the movies that found her, it was persistence. Her poise, expressive eyes, and quiet strength caught the attention of filmmakers, and soon she was cast in Roman Holiday, a role that would win her an Oscar and launch a career that defined grace for generations. But the girl who once hid in cellars from bombs never forgot her roots. Audrey Hepburn's rise wasn't just about talent. It was about resilience, humility, and a belief in beauty when the world gave her every reason to stop believing. James Stewart, from hardware shelves to Hollywood. Long before he became the everyman hero of American cinema, James Stewart was stacking paint cans and hammering nails in his father's hardware store in the quiet town of Indiana, Pennsylvania. A lanky, soft-spoken young man, he seemed destined to inherit the family business, rooted in tradition, community, and practical skill. But while he helped customers and managed the aisles, a different kind of blueprint was forming in his mind. At Princeton University, Stewart initially pursued architecture, but the stage drew him in with quiet force. He joined a campus drama troupe, almost on a whim, and discovered a deep connection to performance, a style that favored sincerity over showmanship. After graduation, he moved to New York, chasing uncertain opportunities in a field where charm was currency and patience was power. Those early years weren't filled with applause. Roles were scarce, and he often relied on the same work ethic and steadiness he'd learned from hours behind the counter. But something about him was different. Stewart didn't perform like he was acting. He simply embodied his characters with a kind of grounded truth that audiences instinctively trusted. From Mr. Smith Goes to Washington to It's a Wonderful Life, he became a symbol of integrity and quiet resilience. James Stewart didn't explode onto the screen. He earned his place, one role at a time, bringing the values of a small-town shop into the heart of Hollywood storytelling. Clark Gable, power lines to the palace of fame. Before he became the smirking, sharp-dressed king of the silver screen, Clark Gable was a restless young man climbing telephone poles and hauling tools through the American Midwest. Born in Ohio, Gable dropped out of school at 16 and took on a string of tough, physical jobs, working as a lumberjack, oil field roustabout, and eventually a telephone lineman. It was honest work, demanding and unpredictable, and for a time, it seemed like that would be his life. But Gable had a fascination with theater, and after seeing a stage play, he was hooked. He decided to leave behind the cables and calluses for curtain calls and cue lines, scraping together enough money to join a traveling theater troupe. In between odd jobs and night classes in diction and posture, he slowly transformed himself, refining the rugged edges and molding a presence that could command attention in any room. His early days in Hollywood were far from glamorous. He was too tall, too rough, too unconventional by the era's standards, and casting directors didn't know what to do with him. But Gable didn't flinch. He kept working extra roles, stage performances, voice training, and eventually studios started to notice what audiences already felt. This man didn't need to act like star, he simply was one. With Gone with the Wind, he became a cultural titan. But behind the charisma and commanding presence was a man who had once strung power lines in the freezing cold, who knew the value of grit, and who never forgot what it took to climb. Not just poles, but his way to the top. Humphrey Bogart, stage sets and sea boots. Long before his name became synonymous with more cool and trenchcoat charisma, Humphrey Bogart was navigating the real-life grit of early adulthood with no spotlight in sight. Born into a well-to-do family in New York, his path seemed set for private schools and polite society, but Bogart veered off course. After being expelled from prep school, he enlisted in the U.S. Navy, serving during World War I aboard a ship patrolling the Atlantic. The military gave him structure, but more than that, it gave him time to reflect and to realize that life beyond routine was what he craved. After the war, he drifted toward the stage, not as an actor at first, but as a stagehand and production assistant. He moved scenery, hammered sets, and worked behind the curtains in small theaters, learning the mechanics of performance from the ground up. It wasn't glamorous, but it taught him discipline, timing, and the rhythms of storytelling. When he finally started acting, his early roles were stiff, forgettable, even dismissed. For years, he played second-string gangsters or forgettable tough guys. But something shifted. The same raw, no-nonsense energy he brought to the stage crew began to creep into his characters. He wasn't polished, but he was real, and audiences felt it. With films like The Maltese Falcon and Casablanca, Bogart's authenticity made him immortal. Yet beneath the gruff exterior was a man who had once swabbed decks and sandbagged sets, who knew how to build a story because he had built the stage it stood on. Cary Grant, acrobatics to A-list. Before he became the epitome of charm and sophistication, Cary Grant was a teenager walking on stilts and swinging from trapezes in English music halls. Born Archibald Leach in Bristol, England, he ran away from home at just 14 to join a traveling acrobatic troupe. It wasn't rebellion, it was escape. He had grown up in a difficult household, and the stage offered freedom, movement, and a chance to invent himself. As part of the troupe, he learned physical discipline, timing, and how to win over a crowd with body language alone. They toured relentlessly, eventually landing in America, where the young performer saw the glitz of vaudeville, Broadway, and soon after, Hollywood. He wasn't born into elegance. He rehearsed it, refined it, and turned it into art. His first roles were small and forgettable, often typecasting him as a handsome face without depth. But Grant's charm wasn't just surface level. Beneath the tuxedos and smooth talk was the precision of a performer who knew how to balance risk, movement, and emotion, skills learned not in drama school, but in circus tents and backstage dressing rooms. With classics like North by Northwest, bringing up Baby and Charade, he redefined what a leading man could be, stylish yet self-aware, comedic yet commanding. Cary Grant wasn't discovered, he was built, one leap, one pratfall, one perfectly delivered line at a time. And long before he stepped onto a film set, he had already mastered the show. Katharine Hepburn, rehearsals, rejection, and resolve. Before she became a 4-time Academy Award winner and the defiant queen of old Hollywood, Katharine Hepburn was a theater usher, a student performer, and a woman constantly told she was too headstrong for the screen. Raised in a progressive New England household, she grew up climbing trees, reading voraciously, and questioning every rule that tried to box her in. But even with confidence and intellect, her path to stardom wasn't smooth. After graduating from Bryn Mawr College, where she starred in school plays, Hepburn threw herself into the uncertain world of theater. She took any role she could get, small parts, understudy work, even backstage jobs, just to stay close to the spotlight. At first, directors called her voice too shrill, her look too unconventional, her manner too sharp. She was fired from roles more than once, and told she'd never fit the mold of a leading lady. But she wasn't interested in fitting any mold. She worked relentlessly to hone her craft, blending fierce independence with sharp intelligence. Her presence was unlike anything audiences had seen, raw, bold, and unapologetically modern. When film eventually came calling, she brought that same defiance to the screen, turning early skepticism into awe with films like The Philadelphia Story, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and The African Queen. Katharine Hepburn didn't break into Hollywood. She challenged it to keep up with her. Her rise wasn't about conformity, but conviction born from backstage halls, ignored auditions, and the kind of strength that doesn't wait for permission. John Wayne, from props to pioneer. Before he strode across the screen as the embodiment of American grit, John Wayne was just Marion Morrison, a college football player hauling props and moving furniture on the backlots of Fox Studios. He wasn't born into Hollywood. In fact, he only landed the studio job because he lost his athletic scholarship at USC after surfing injury. Faced with mounting bills and no clear path forward, he took whatever work he could find, mostly behind the scenes. As a studio handyman, he worked in silence, observing the sets, the actors, the directors. He was a large, quiet presence, often underestimated but always attentive. What he lacked in experience, he made up for in presence. And slowly, the right people started to notice. He was given extra roles, background appearances, even the occasional line. But his big break didn't come quickly. For years, he starred in low-budget westerns and B-movies, sometimes filming multiple features in a single month. The roles were repetitive, the pay minimal, and the acclaim non-existent. Still, he showed up every day with the same focus he had on the football field, knowing that consistency, not luck, was what separated a name from a legacy. When Stagecoach finally hit in 1939, it changed everything. John Wayne became a symbol, not just of the Western, but of strength, loyalty, and endurance. And yet, behind the legend was a young man who once stacked sandbags and moved furniture, proving that you don't need a spotlight to begin your journey, just the patience to stay in the room until it turns on. Lucille Ball, from chorus lines to comedy royalty. Before she was the queen of television comedy, Lucille Ball was a struggling actress, a model, and a chorus girl trying to find her place in a city that didn't quite know what to do with her. Born in Jamestown, New York, she left home in her teens to attend drama school in New York City. But it didn't go as planned. Her instructors told her she didn't have what it took, too shy, too awkward, not enough presence. Still, she didn't quit. To make ends meet, she worked as a waitress, sold cigarettes in theater lobbies, and modeled hats for local department stores. Her beauty got her noticed in print ads, but the studios only saw her as another face in a sea of hopefuls. She took background roles and walk-on parts, building her resume one forgettable appearance at a time. Yet even then, there was something about her, an energy, a spark, that couldn't be taught. What truly set Lucille apart was her relentless work ethic. She spent years as the so-called queen of the B-movies, playing small roles with big commitment. And when the opportunity finally came to blend comedy with her unique timing and fearlessness, she didn't just rise, she transformed the medium. With I Love Lucy, she changed television forever. But behind the groundbreaking sitcom and the iconic red hair was a woman who had been told no more times than most. She kept going anyway. From selling smokes to selling out stages, Lucille Ball's path proves that the best performers are built, not born, and that laughter is sometimes forged in the grind. Bette Davis, cigarette girl to screen goddess. Before she became known for her piercing gaze and fearless performances, Bette Davis was just a determined young woman hustling her way through the theater circuit of New York. Raised in Massachusetts, she didn't come from glamour or influence, only grit. Her early ambition was met with resistance. Casting agents called her too plain, too intense, too different from the polished ideal of the day. But Davis never aimed to fit in. She aimed to stand out. In the beginning, she worked wherever she could to stay close to the stage. One of her earliest jobs was as a cigarette girl in a theater lobby, dressed up to sell smokes to patrons during intermission, quietly studying every gesture and tone coming from the actors on stage. It was a job of pauses and passing moments, but for Bette, it was a front-row education. She eventually broke into theater, and after grinding through small productions, she caught the attention of Hollywood. But her arrival in Los Angeles didn't come with a red carpet, it came with rejection. Studio executives thought she had no sex appeal, no spark, no screen presence. What they didn't see was the fire building beneath the surface. With time, that fire would erupt into one of the most commanding careers in film history. From Jezebel to All About Eve, Davis wasn't just playing roles, she was rewriting what it meant to be a leading woman. She embraced complexity, power, and defiance at a time when that wasn't expected or welcomed. Bette Davis didn't become a legend by being liked, she did it by being undeniable. Fred Astaire, vaudeville roots and velvet steps. Before he danced across marble floors in top hats and tails, Fred Astaire was a child performer shuffling through smoky theaters and worn-out vaudeville stages. Born Frederick Austerlitz in Omaha, Nebraska, he began performing with his sister Adele at the age of 5. Their mother, recognizing their talent early, moved the family to New York to pursue a career on stage, not out of luxury, but necessity. Fred didn't come from Hollywood royalty. He came from endless rehearsals, small-time circuits, and cramped train rides from one town to the next. The siblings performed tirelessly, perfecting tap routines and comedic timing under flickering stage lights for indifferent audiences. It was in those unpredictable venues that Fred learned not just how to dance, but how to adapt, how to stay polished under pressure, and how to command attention with grace instead of force. When Adele retired from the act, Fred faced a harsh reality. He had to reinvent himself solo in an industry that wasn't convinced he could shine without her. Studios were skeptical. One executive famously wrote that he can't sing, can't act, slightly balding, but dances a little. But Fred Astaire had been proving people wrong since childhood, and he wasn't about to stop. His breakthrough came not with spectacle, but with precision. Every movement was refined, every gesture smooth. Paired with Ginger Rogers, he created cinematic magic, redefining dance on film. But the real story lies in the decades of discipline before the fame, the hours of tap shoes on wood floors, the overlooked bookings, and the grind of a boy who turned rhythm into immortality. Rita Hayworth, Spotlight from the Shadows. Before she became the sultry symbol of 1940s Hollywood, Rita Hayworth was a shy teenager dancing in nightclubs under the watchful eye of her father. Born Margarita Cancino in Brooklyn, she was part of a family steeped in performance, but not in luxury. Her father, a Spanish flamenco dancer, saw her talent early and pushed her onto the stage, not in bright lights, but in smoky, late-night lounges, performing routines far beyond her years. As a child, she toured small venues and hotels, often working long hours for little pay. She didn't attend glamorous premieres. She rehearsed endlessly in empty rooms and backstage halls, learning to perfect her posture, her timing, and her presence. Dancing was more than performance, it was survival. By her mid-teens, she had already lived the kind of discipline and pressure many never face. When she transitioned to film, she faced a different challenge. Her name, her heritage, even her appearance were changed by the studios to fit a more marketable image. Her hair was lightened, her surname shortened, and her accent softened. Hollywood was willing to make her a star, as long as she fit into their narrow mold. But Rita Hayworth brought something the studio system couldn't manufacture: depth. Behind the glamour, there was strength forged from years of hard work and a grace honed from a life spent on stage long before the cameras rolled. With films like Gilda and CoverGirl, she became unforgettable, not just for how she looked, but for the force she carried beneath the surface. She didn't arrive by luck. She danced her way out of the shadows and into legend. Ingrid Bergman, from nanny to notoriety. Before she captivated the world with her natural beauty and quiet strength, Ingrid Bergman was just a teenager in Stockholm trying to find her way after losing both parents at a young age. Left largely to navigate life on her own, she supported herself by working as a nanny, caring for children during the day while dreaming of stages and scripts at night. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave her structure, patience, and a deep sense of independence. She saved what she could and applied to the Royal Dramatic Theatre School, the same institution that trained Greta Garbo. Even then, she stood out, not because of dramatic flair or striking elegance, but because of something subtler, a presence that felt sincere. She wasn't trying to be seen, she simply was, and that authenticity became her signature. Her early film work in Sweden drew quiet praise, but Hollywood was a different world. When she arrived in America, executives were unsure of what to do with her. She didn't fit the mold, no heavy makeup, no affected mannerisms. She was soft-spoken, intelligent, and deeply committed to the truth of a role. Yet that quiet defiance became her strength. With films like Casablanca, Gaslight, and Notorious, Bergman redefined the Hollywood leading lady. She didn't rely on flash, she relied on honesty. And that integrity, shaped in the quiet hours of caring for others, became the foundation of her career. From nanny to screen legend, Ingrid Bergman's rise wasn't loud, but it echoed through time. Spencer Tracy, truck routes and tough roles. Before he became one of Hollywood's most respected actors, Spencer Tracy was just another young man trying to find direction in post-World War I America. Born in Milwaukee to a working-class family, he bounced between schools, unsure of his place in the world. After serving briefly in the Navy, he returned home restless and searching for purpose. To make ends meet, he drove trucks and took odd jobs, long hours, little pay, and plenty of time to think. It wasn't the stage that called him first, but the voice behind it. After watching a play with a powerful performance, Tracy was struck, not by the spotlight, but by the truth in the delivery. He enrolled in the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, where his raw, unpolished style stood apart from more theatrical students around him. He didn't perform for applause, he performed like it mattered. His rise wasn't meteoric. Tracy spent years in stock theater, traveling from town to town, honing his craft in small venues where the only reward was the work itself. But slowly, directors and critics began to notice. He had a grounded intensity, a quiet honesty that made everything he said feel real, even when the script wasn't. When he moved to film, he brought that same authenticity. From Captains Courageous to Guests Who's Coming to Dinner, Spencer Tracy never relied on spectacle. He let the story speak through him. And beneath every performance was a man who had once worked long, solitary hours behind a steering wheel, learning the rhythm of silence, the power of stillness, and how to carry a load without ever needing to show it. Greta Garbo, hats, silence, and stardom. Before she became the enigmatic face of silent film and one of the most mysterious stars in Hollywood history, Greta Garbo was folding clothes and modeling hats in the chill of Stockholm's department stores. Born into poverty, she grew up in a working-class neighborhood, quiet and observant, often retreating into daydreams to escape the hard edges of her world. Her first job came early, stocking shelves, waiting on customers, and doing whatever was needed to help support her family. She later worked at a millinery shop, where her striking looks drew the attention of photographers. Soon, she began appearing in catalogs and local ads, not as a star, but as a mannequin with poise and presence. Her face, even then, held a kind of mystery, a stillness that seemed to pull the viewer in without trying. That quiet magnetism earned her a scholarship to the Royal Dramatic Theatre in Stockholm, where she studied acting with precision and discipline. It wasn't long before Swedish filmmakers took notice, and one of her early performances caught the eye of MGM studio executives. She was brought to Hollywood, where the studio reshaped her image, but they didn't have to teach her how to captivate an audience. She already knew. Garbo spoke few words, even fewer in public, but her silence became her signature. In a time when actresses were expected to sparkle, she smoldered. With films like Camille and Ninotchka, she defined what it meant to be unforgettable without ever raising her voice. From department store clerk to international icon, Greta Garbo didn't chase fame. She let it follow her into quiet. William Holden, Encyclopedias and Stardust. Before he stood in front of cameras with the easy confidence of a born leading man, William Holden was walking door to door with a suitcase full of encyclopedias, trying to sell knowledge one volume at a time. Born in Illinois and raised in Southern California, he didn't grow up with a clear path to stardom. In fact, he studied chemistry in college, thinking he might end up in research or business. But something kept nudging him toward the stage. To help pay tuition, he picked up small jobs, among them selling encyclopedias. It was tedious, thankless work that required patience, persuasion, and the ability to read a room fast. Holden learned quickly that charm had to be earned, not performed. And without realizing it, he was rehearsing for the biggest role of his life, the one where he'd stop knocking on doors and start opening them. His acting break came almost by accident when a studio talent scout noticed him during a college play. Small parts turned into bigger ones, and his natural charisma, grounded in restraint rather than bravado, began to shine through. His breakout role in Golden Boy showed audiences something different, a man who could carry strength and vulnerability in the same breath. With Sunset Boulevard, Stalag 17, and The Bridge on the River Kwai, Holden carved out a legacy of complexity. He wasn't the loudest man in the room, but he was often the one you couldn't look away from. And behind that ease was a young man who once knocked politely, smiled earnestly, and learned how to connect with people one story at a time. Barbara Stanwyck, from Filing Cabinets to Femme Fatale. Before she lit up the screen with fierce intelligence and fearless roles, Barbara Stanwyck was a teenager filing papers and folding laundry to survive. Orphaned at a young age and raised in a series of foster homes, she entered the workforce as soon as she could, first as a file clerk, then as a wrapper in a department store laundry. There were no shortcuts, no safety nets, only long hours and the quiet determination to build something better. She had no formal training, no insider connections, but what she had was grit. To support herself, she took work as a chorus girl in speakeasies and nightclubs, learning how to hold her own in a world that rarely offered second chances. The stage became her proving ground, not just for talent, but for resilience. She learned how to read a crowd, how to command a room, and most importantly, how to keep going when everything said she shouldn't. Her break into film came in the early 1930s, and from the start, she refused to play by anyone else's rules. She brought strength to every role, not by overpowering the scene, but by grounding it in reality. Whether she was playing a cunning femme fatale in Double Indemnity or a self-made woman in Stella Dallas, she brought the weight of lived experience to every frame. Barbara Stanwyck didn't rise to the top through glamour. She climbed there with toughness, discipline, and an unwavering sense of purpose. She was never handed the spotlight. She earned it one line, one role, and one hard-earned opportunity at a time. Henry Fonda, lifeguards, linotypes, and lasting legacy. Before he became one of Hollywood's most respected and quietly powerful actors, Henry Fonda was just a young man in Nebraska working odd jobs and wondering what came next. His early life was far removed from the bright lights of the film industry. He worked in a print shop, operating the linotype machine, an unforgiving, noisy piece of machinery that required focus, precision, and patience. In the summers, he took on work as a lifeguard, spending long days under the sun with only silence and water as company. Acting wasn't even on his radar until his mother suggested he audition for a local theater production. He was hesitant, unsure of himself, but he gave a try, and something clicked. What began as a modest community stage role in Omaha quickly grew into a passion. He soon joined a small repertory company, loading sets, learning lines, and slowly building confidence night by night. When he moved east to pursue theater more seriously, success didn't come quickly. He took on backstage jobs and minor roles, absorbing everything he could from those around him. But what set Fonda apart wasn't flair, it was authenticity. He didn't try to dominate the scene. He let truth speak through stillness, through subtlety. Hollywood eventually took notice, casting him in roles that demanded quiet strength and deep conviction. From The Grapes of Wrath to 12 Angry Men, Henry Fonda became a voice for conscience, integrity, and quiet resistance. And behind every performance was a man who once set type letter by letter, learning that precision and patience are sometimes the foundations of greatness. Joan Crawford, dusty jobs and determination. Before she commanded the screen with icy glamour and fierce ambition, Joan Crawford was scrubbing floors and folding laundry in boarding houses, barely making enough to get by. Born Lucille Fay LeSueur in Texas and raised in poverty, her early years were a constant struggle for stability. She worked as a waitress, a cleaner, and a laundress, taking whatever job she could to survive, even while still in her teens. She dreamed of dancing, not stardom at first, just the chance to move, to perform, to escape. That dream led her to chorus lines in traveling reviews and low-paying stage shows. She often danced injured or exhausted, determined not to be overlooked. Her break came when she moved to Hollywood and started working for MGM, not as a star, but as a background player under a new name the studio gave her, Joan Crawford. She wasn't an instant hit. Critics called her too common, too intense, too raw. But she studied, trained, and worked relentlessly to refine herself. She watched other actors, mimic their best traits, and built her presence piece by piece. Through sheer force of will, she rose from extra roles to become one of MGM's biggest stars. Her performances in films like Mildred Pierce, Possessed, and Grand Hotel revealed a range that few expected. Emotional power, vulnerability, and a toughness rooted in lived experience. Joan Crawford didn't become a star by luck or lineage. She built her own legend, starting with nothing but grit, a dancer's discipline, and the unshakable belief that no one would work harder than she would. Errol Flynn, drifter, dreamer, daredevil. Before he swashbuckled across screens and became Hollywood's most daring leading man, Errol Flynn was a restless adventurer without a map or a plan. Born in Tasmania, far from the sound stages of California, he spent his early years drifting from job to job across the Pacific. At various times, he was a plantation overseer in New Guinea, a fisherman, a dock worker, and even a freelance writer. He wasn't looking for fame, he was chasing freedom. Flynn had an appetite for danger and a knack for reinvention. With little formal training, he threw himself into each new role life gave him, whether that meant trekking through jungles or bluffing his way onto a ship crew. He was equal parts rogue and romantic, living on instinct, curiosity, and charm. It was that same reckless energy that caught the attention of filmmakers when he found his way to England and began acting almost by accident. He landed a few roles, and though raw, his screen presence was magnetic. Hollywood came calling, and soon Flynn was cast in Captain Blood, a breakout role that would define him as cinema's ultimate swashbuckler. What followed was a string of iconic performances in The Adventures of Robin Hood, The Seahawk, and They Died with Their Boots On, films that let him channel the wild, untamed spirit he'd honed long before he ever stepped in front of a camera. Errol Flynn didn't step into Hollywood as a polished performer. He crashed into it full speed, with a past as unpredictable as the characters he played. He lived as boldly as he acted, and every frame he filled carried the weight of a man who had already lived 10 lives before he ever became a legend. The stars of old Hollywood may seem larger than life, but their stories remind us that greatness often begins in the most ordinary places, on factory floors, in laundry rooms, behind cashier counters, or beneath stage lights. No one is watching. Before they were legends, they were workers, dreamers, and relentless believers in something more. Their journeys weren't paved with fame. They were built with effort, failure, and quiet resilience. If these stories moved you, inspired you, or simply reminded you of how far passion can carry a person, consider subscribing for more stories that celebrate the human path behind the iconic face. There's always more to the legend than meets the lens.